This is Rummy's Corner. Who were the top 5 heavyweight champions during the 1980s? In the 1980s, there were 15 men who held claim to at least a portion of the heavyweight championship between January 1st, 1980 and December 31st, 1989. For the purposes of this video, we are specifically comparing heavyweight championship reigns and championship bouts that happened during this particular stretch. And as you will soon see, things are far more complicated in the 80s than they were in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. Larry Holmes entered 1980 as the WBC heavyweight champion, and John Tate as the WBA heavyweight champion. In February 1980, Tate lost his belt against Mike Weaver. By the end of '81, Weaver made 2 defenses of the WBA, including a 13th round knockout against Gerrie Coetzee. Meanwhile, Holmes made 7 defenses in '80 and '81, which included a victory against Muhammad Ali, where the Eastern Assassin earned a valid claim to the heavyweight lineal championship because Ali had never lost the crown inside the ring. In December '82, Weaver lost the WBA belt against Michael Dokes, and that same year Holmes made a pair of defenses against Gentleman Gerrie Coetzee and Randall Tex Cobb. Holmes made another 4 title defenses in 1983, including a 12-round split decision victory against Terrible Tim Witherspoon, and also a first-round knockout against Marvis Frazier in a bout that was not officially sanctioned by the WBC. Meanwhile, Dokes had made 1 title defense before losing the WBA belt against Gerrie Coetzee in September '83. In December 1983, Larry vacated the WBC belt and was awarded the inaugural IBF Heavyweight Championship, effectively lending the new alphabet body immediate credibility. In March 1984, Witherspoon captured the vacant WBC belt when he beat Greg Page by 12-round majority decision. Terrible Tim lost that belt a few months later when he lost a 12-round majority decision against Pinklon Thomas. Holmes made another defense of his belt in November '84, and then in December '84, Coetzee lost the WBA belt when he was stopped by Greg Page. Holmes defended the IBF in March '85 against David Bay. In April '85, Page lost the WBA in a 15-round unanimous decision loss against Tony Tubbs. In May '85, Holmes won a close and somewhat controversial 15-round unanimous decision against Carl "The Truth" Williams. In June '85, Thomas defended his WBC belt against Mike Weaver. And then in September '85, Holmes lost the IBF and lineal titles in a 15-round unanimous decision loss against Michael Spinks. In January '86, Tubbs lost the WBA belt against Witherspoon. In March '86, Pinklon Thomas lost the WBC belt against Trevor Berbick, and in April '86, Spinks beat Holmes again by 15-round split decision in their somewhat controversial rematch. Witherspoon defended the WBA belt when he stopped Frank Bruno in July '86. In September '86, Spinks made a successful title defense against Stefan Tangstad. In November '86, Berbick lost the WBC title when he was stopped in 2 rounds by 20-year-old Iron Mike Tyson. Then in December '86, Terrible Tim lost the WBA belt when he was stopped in round 1 by James Bone Crusher Smith. In February '87, Spinks was stripped of the IBF belt, although he still held a valid claim to the lineage. In March '87, Mike Tyson beat Bone Crusher Smith by 12-round unanimous decision to win the WBA belt to go along with his WBC belt. In May '87, Tony Tucker beat James Buster Douglas to win the vacant IBF belt, on the very same night that Mike Tyson defended his unified WBC/WBA belts against Pinklon Thomas. In June '87, Spinks defeated Gentleman Gerrie Coetzee to defend his claim to the lineage. In August '87, Tyson beat Tucker by 12-round unanimous decision to win the IBF belt, which earned Iron Mike all three major alphabet bodies of the time, and Tyson made a defense of those three belts in October '87. Tyson made two more defenses in early 1988, the first in January against former longtime champion Larry Holmes, where Iron Mike stopped the Eastern Assassin in round 4, and the other in March when Tyson stopped Tony Tubbs in round 2. Then in June 1988, Tyson stopped Spinks in round 1, which earned him a valid claim to the heavyweight lineal crown to go along with all three major alphabet belts, marking Iron Mike as the first truly undisputed world heavyweight champion since Leon Spinks defeated Muhammad Ali 10 years earlier. Tyson made two more title defenses in 1989, first in February when he stopped Frank Bruno in round 5, and then again in June when he stopped Carl the Truth Williams in round 1. And that was the last heavyweight championship fight in the 1980s. Oof, Maron, that's a really complex and messy championship path. And yet, there is something poetic about the complexity, where the 1980s began messy and uncertain, and then it got even messier with the addition of a new alphabet belt, belts being stripped and or vacated, and the WBA belt being passed around like a hot potato. But then at the end of the decade, we had one world heavyweight champion who won all three major belts and a valid claim to the lineage one by one in decisive fashion. But even with that quasi-poetic conclusion to the wild 1980s heavyweight championship landscape, this is a very tricky proposition. It's tricky all around, and unlike the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the 1980s represents a very difficult decision to make for that top spot. But ranking these 80s heavyweights based on their championship fight performances between January 1st, 1980 and December 31st, 1989, based on a total of 46 championship contests, here is how I'd rate them. Starting with those who didn't make the cut for me, and no disrespect to any of these former champions, but John Tate, Muhammad Ali, Tony Tucker, Tony Tubbs, Trevor Berbick, Michael Dokes, Gerrie Coetzee, Greg Page, and Bone Crusher Smith did not make the cut for me. And then just missing the cut for me is Mike Weaver. And I think you can make a really strong case for Weaver at number 5, or maybe even number 4, but I had Weaver at number 6. Ultimately, I went with Pinklon Thomas at number 5, but again, it's close. But I think the quality of wins over Witherspoon and Weaver himself gives Pinklon the slight edge over Weaver's wins against Tate, Coetzee, and Quick Tillis. Number 4 is Terrible Tim Witherspoon, and I think Witherspoon is the clear number 4 here. Witherspoon was a 2-time champion, and in terms of his championship credentials in the 1980s, I believe he is better than the 11 champions I've ranked below him, and clearly not on the level of the 3 I ranked above him. But during a decade where so many champions were unable to leave a lasting impression, Terrible Tim succeeded where most of the others failed. Number 3 is Michael Spinks. Same kind of thing here. I think Spinks is clearly the number 3 guy. Spinks ended the long reign of the great Larry Holmes, officially beating him in back-to-back contests, and he had another pair of championship wins on top of that. While I believe Witherspoon and Spinks were clear locks for number 4 and number 3 respectively, separating the top 2 is a mighty difficult proposition. Holmes and Tyson are the clear top 2 standout heavyweight champions from the 80s. Head to head, Tyson beat Holmes decisively, but I'm not holding that against him here, which is something I've strived for throughout the series. Basically, the Tyson victory isn't the end-all be-all when evaluating their respective championship reigns, and I have not been holding championship fight losses from a post-championship reign against any of the champions in this series. At quick glance, Holmes has the quantity. Larry had 16 championship wins versus Tyson's 10. He had 16 title defenses versus Tyson's 9. And he had 11 knockout wins versus Tyson's 8. Holmes was better by the raw numbers in a statistical sense. And when we evaluate the quality of opponent, Holmes fares well here too. In terms of what Holmes did in just the 80s, he beat 5 former or future heavyweight titleists, including the lineage win against Ali, a win against the undefeated Gerrie Coetzee, and a number of other good but not great wins in terms of quality. The big criticism against Holmes is that later in his reign, he was fighting softer opposition. A few of his wins are also considered to be controversial, the wins against Witherspoon and Williams in particular, but in this exercise it's about the official outcome, and the same applies to Larry's somewhat controversial loss in his rematch with Spinks. The fact remains, Holmes was a steady constant throughout the first half of the decade, and he was active and winning, while the WBA belt was, again, tossed around like a freaking hot potato. When we look at Mike Tyson, he didn't have the same number of championship victories or defenses, but his quality is rather impeccable in the grand scheme of the heavyweight championship landscape at that time. Whereas Larry faced 5 future or former or current champions in his 16 wins, Tyson faced 8 in just 10. And his other 2 wins were pretty solid against the likes of Tyrell Biggs and Carl the Truth Williams. At the end of the day, even though Larry had more wins, I think Tyson's championship reign during the 80s was against a higher quality of overall opposition. The reality is, I think this is a situation where you could, and perhaps should, have a number 1A and a number 1B. But for me, I went with the Eastern Assassin at number 2. One area where Larry fell short and Mike succeeded circles back to the idea that with all of the messy complexity in the 80s heavyweight championship landscape, Iron Mike fought and beat every rival who had a championship claim which disputed his own. Now, a lot of this was driven by politics and money, which opened up a far more feasible path for Mike towards the goal of becoming undisputed. But when we simply evaluate the 80s championship credentials for what actually happened, Mike Tyson proved he was the best when he won all the belts and earned a legitimate claim to the lineal heavyweight championship. So Mike Tyson edges out Larry Holmes for the number 1 spot in my ranking here. As a final thought, for all the fans who were too young to witness the rise of Iron Mike, and how he earned the distinction of being the baddest man on the planet, well, this 1980s chronology illustrates why perfectly. During a decade where the championship was splintered throughout, Iron Mike won the WBC belt, then he added the WBA, then he added the IBF, and finally he added the lineage. That's why Mike was viewed as the baddest man on the planet, because the championship landscape was a total mess that lacked an undisputed world heavyweight champion for the longest stretch during the long, rich history of professional boxing up until that point. And that is mighty significant in my book. Not only was Mike the youngest heavyweight to ever win a portion of the heavyweight title, but he effectively beat everyone worth beating during that short stretch of just over 3 years. So here are my final rankings of the top 5 heavyweight champions from the 1980s. And a quick note, the asterisk next to Larry's and Michael's numbers is me including the non-sanctioned title bouts where Larry was defending the lineage against Frazier, and also the same situation with Spinks and Coetzee, which is consistent with what I did in the 70s and what I will be doing moving along. So what do you think of my 80s ranking? Please do share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Corner.